Violetta, Mark, and Alice are each candidates in a school election. They anxiously await the word to hear about who will win the position of class president. The votes have been counted. Mark has 30% of the vote, Alice has 25% of the vote, and Violetta has 45% of the vote. Who won the election? Depending on the voting system used for the school election, it may not be who you think it would be. In this lesson, we'll discuss the differences between a plurality-based voting system and a majority-based voting system. You'll also find out who won this particular school election. If the school is using a plurality-based voting system, the answer is easy. Violetta, who has the greatest percentage of the votes, wins. In a plurality voting system, a candidate may be elected with less than a majority of the vote. Plurality voting systems typically operate based on a concept called first past the post, which refers to a particular candidate who has the most votes compared with others. Based on a first past the post plurality election system, even if Violetta had only 20% of the vote, if every other candidate had less than that, 1%, 2%, 3%, or up to 19%, she could still win this election. There would have to be a lot of candidates to make that happen, but a candidate can win even with a small percentage of the vote as long as it is the highest percentage compared with other candidates. This system is very common for nations influenced by the United Kingdom and is the method used in the majority of elections in the United States. It plays a role in the likelihood that there will be one party that dominates most of the government rather than a range of parties represented. It's also the form of election you would expect to see in a school election. But this school election is a bit different. They're trying something new this year to determine who the class president will be. Instead of a plurality-based election, this election will use a majority voting system. This system requires a candidate to receive more than 50% of the vote. In both the plurality and majority systems, the candidate with the most votes will win, but in a majority voting system, this could take more than one election if no one wins the majority in the first case. So in the case of Mark with 30% of the vote, Alice with 25%, and Violetta with 45%, Mark and Violetta will go on to a second election, and voters will have a chance to choose between them. What happens as a result of that second election might seem surprising at first. Mark actually ends up with 52% of the vote, while Violetta has 48%. He was able to obtain a majority when most of the people who voted for Alice actually had Mark as their second choice. When they had the chance, they chose Mark over Violetta. This process is sometimes known as a two-round system or runoff election. In political elections, this can sometimes make it more likely that a third-party candidate can gain traction, even if they're not part of the two major parties in the United States. A different method of achieving a majority, but without the need to hold more than one election, is to have voters rank their choices for candidates up front when they vote. The second round can then be determined without voters returning to the polls. This is sometimes known as the alternative vote, instant runoff, or a ranked choice. In this style, a voter could indicate number 1 for Alice, number 2 for Mark, and number 3 for Violetta, for instance, allowing the school election to take place using the majority system without a second round. As a result of the majority-based election, Mark has a chance to gain more votes in the runoff and becomes the new class president. In this lesson, we discuss the difference between plurality and majority voting systems. In a plurality voting system, a candidate may be elected with less than a majority of the vote. This type of system often uses an approach called first past the post, which refers to a particular candidate who has the most votes compared with others, even if their actual percentage of the vote is small. In this approach, a single political party will typically dominate the government to some degree. A majority voting system, on the other hand, requires a candidate to receive more than 50% of the vote. Although both the plurality and majority systems will elect the candidate with the most votes, in a majority voting system, this could take more than one election if no one wins the majority in the first election. Another option to determine a winner in a majority system is to have the voter rank up front which of the candidates they would choose in order of preference. This approach may make it more likely that other parties are represented beyond one or two main political parties.